The death toll from the coronavirus pandemic has surpassed 5,000 in Europe as worldwide fatality surged to over 11,000. Italy has reported 627 deaths in 24 hours, taking the total to 4,032, while over 1,000 people have died in Spain. More in this report.
Governments around the world are increasingly adopting sweeping measures to stem the spread of the new coronavirus. Jordan has imposed a lockdown in the country starting from today to combat COVID-19. Colombia has also announced a compulsory general confinement from Tuesday until April 13. Meanwhile, in China, restrictions on movement are being eased gradually as it reported 0 local coronavirus cases for the third consecutive day. Meanwhile, Pakistan's flag carrier PIA has suspended all international flights till March 28th as the country's infection cases have surged to 510 with 3 deaths. Zimbabwe has reported its first case, while Singapore says 2 patients of the new coronavirus have died, marking its first fatalities from the virus.
2 patients in our National Center for Infectious Diseases have passed away this morning due to complications arising from COVID-19 infection, despite the best efforts of our medical team to care for them. Our thoughts are with their families and their loved ones during this difficult moment.
A number of airlines across the world have suspended their operations, but despite all restrictions, many citizens continue to travel. The World Health Organization has warned that the young people are not immune from the coronavirus and must avoid socializing.
Today, I have a message for young people. You're not invincible. This virus could put you in hospital for weeks or even kill you. Even if you don't get sick, the choices you make about where you go could be the difference between life and death for someone else.
The vaccine for the deadly infection has not been made yet, but the WHO says 20 vaccines against the coronavirus are currently being developed worldwide.
In the US, more than 70 million people in 3 major states have been locked down in a bid to stop the spread of the new coronavirus pandemic. After California, governors of New York and Illinois states issued the immediate stay-at-home orders. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo says the outbreak threat is real and they have to overcome it. He said all workers in non-essential businesses must stay home, while all gatherings will be banned in the state. Earlier, President Donald Trump ruled out a nationwide lockdown despite 14,400 confirmed cases and 218 deaths in the country. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has urged American citizens to call on their government to lift sanctions amid coronavirus pandemic. In a statement, Rouhani said many ordinary Iranians have lost their health, jobs, and income due to U.S. curbs. He said it is time for Americans to ask their government for answers and not allow their history to be blackened further. Rouhani said the war on COVID-19 can only be successful if all nations work together for its containment. The president warned that under a pandemic situation, Tehran, Paris, London, and Washington are not far apart. Rouhani said the surrounding oceans of a continent are not an adequate defense for the U.S. in this pandemic. Iran says it has exchanged a prisoner with France after Paris released an Iranian detained over violations of U.S. sanctions against Tehran. Iranian state media says Tehran has returned a French academic held on security charges after Paris freed an Iranian engineer. It said French government released the Iranian despite French court's decision to extradite him to the U.S. The media said Paris freed the prisoner in an act of mutual cooperation after Tehran showed the intention to release French citizen. France has been asking Iran to release 2 French researchers, Fariba Adelkha and Roland Marshall, detained in 2019. Iran has also carried out prisoner exchanges with the US, Australia, and Germany in recent months. In other news, Seoul says Pyongyang has fired 2 short-range projectiles from Pyongan province towards the east coast of the Korean peninsula. In a statement, South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff said such actions are highly inappropriate amid COVID-19 crisis and called for an immediate stop. Meanwhile, Japan's cabinet secretariat said it detected at least one projectile, but it presumably had not reached Tokyo's territorial waters. This is North Korea's third launch of short-range missiles and projectiles this month. The UAE's branch of Red Crescent says 2 of its aid workers have been killed in Yemen after unknown armed men kidnapped them in Aden. In a tweet, the body said its workers were killed in one of the world's most vulnerable humanitarian zones. Yemen's south has been a conflicted zone between government forces and separatists. The two parties signed a power-sharing agreement in Riyadh last November, while little sign of implementation on the ground. Tens of thousands of people, mostly civilians, have been killed in Yemen's conflict and millions displaced since 2015. Damascus says Russian President Vladimir Putin called his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad to discuss the developments of Idlib ceasefire. State media says the violations committed by the rebels were also discussed during the call. In a statement, the Kremlin said both leaders discussed the promotion of political process within the framework of Syrian Constitutional Committee. It said the leaders also discussed issues related to rendering humanitarian assistance to Syria. According to the statement, the two sides agreed to continue contacts at different levels. Earlier, Turkey and Russia reached a ceasefire agreement on Syria's northwest Idlib on 5th March. Turkey says it has killed 2 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria. The Defense Ministry says the fighters were killed during Operation Peace Spring. The ministry said it will not stop the operations against militants in the region. Turkey launched a trio of operations across its border into northern Syria in 2016. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year-long terror campaign. The US-based NGO Human Rights Watch says Greece is denying migrants and refugees their fundamental right to seek asylum. In a report, the body said nearly 200 refugees are being detained on the Lesbos island in the unacceptable conditions. It said 436 others have been transported to the Malakasa Center in Athens, where conditions are unknown. The HRW said Greek officials have been holding women and children fleeing war and persecution in the open in cold temperatures for weeks. It said the authorities are denying migrants their right to get the humanitarian and legal assistance they need and are entitled to. Since their arrival, refugees have been restricted to areas in small towns and villages of Malveos, Clio, Ehrios, Demetrios in the north. An Indian activist, Amulya Leon, is jailed for over a month for raising the pro-Pakistan slogan in a rally. The 19-year-old has been charged with sedition for chanting "Long Live Pakistan" on February 20th. The Bengaluru police arrested her after ruling Bharatiya Janata Party and Hindu extremists called her anti-national. Amulya is booked under treachery charges of Indian Penal Code for showing disaffection towards the government of India. The maximum punishment under these sections could go up to a life sentence. Her lawyers have since moved a bail application and the matter will be heard on 24th March. Indian internet ban has hit the health sector in occupied Kashmir hard as Valley reports its first coronavirus case. The occupied territory has been reeling under curfew and complete shutdown for the last 230 days. Kashmiri doctors and health workers have asked the Indian government to end communications blackout to counter the epidemic. They said human security and health of the people of the valley must not be kept hostage to the so-called security of the state. The medics said the outbreak of COVID-19 in the valley is a potential explosion waiting to happen. They said it is absolutely necessary the internet is restored in the valley before the outbreak becomes uncontrollable. The US and Mexico have agreed to restrict non-essential travel across their border in an effort to limit the spread of COVID-19. President Donald Trump announced that his administration will invoke a health-focused statute to block migrants from entering US illegally. The non-essential travel measures will also restrict tourism at the border. Mexico's Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said trade, work and medical trips will not be restricted at the border. He said the measures against illegal immigration mean Washington can rapidly return Central Americans and Mexican migrants in arrests. A U.S. official said the restrictions would not impact rail or trucking shipments across the border. So far, the U.S. has many more confirmed coronavirus cases and deaths than Mexico. Amid the COVID-19 outbreak, letters have been sent to over 65,000 retired doctors and nurses in England and Wales, asking them to return to the National Health Service. Senior UK officials said the former employees are needed to help boost frontline emergency services. The development comes after the government pledged to ensure that all hospitals have enough protective gear and ventilators. In Scotland, former medical workers have also been asked to consider returning to the health service. Meanwhile, police arrested a man after he refused to isolate himself upon arrival on the Isle of Man. Earlier, authorities announced self-isolation for 14 days under emergency legislation. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back to our news bulletin. The United States has long loved its drive-ins and drive-thrus for movies, fast food, pharmacies, and banking. Now the coronavirus pandemic has added a new one, Catholic confessions. More in this report.
A U.S. pastor is offering drive-through confessions in a parking lot. With his church closed due to the COVID-19 outbreak, Scott Homer turned to the tried and tested method in this nation of car lovers. Every day, except Sunday, he sits on a wooden chair in his priestly robes in the parking lot outside his Maryland chapel and does a contact-free confession and blessing.
More open air, so there's like airflow and all that good stuff. And then we always keep that 6-foot distance, and I keep them in their cars. I say you got to stay in your cars because I don't want groups to form. You know what I mean? And there could be a transmission there. So it's a weird thing where you got to think about the spiritual and the physical at the same time.
2 lines of traffic cones and a sign guide cars outside the St. Edward's Church in Bowie, a small town around 30 kilometers outside Washington. Drivers lower their windows and confess their sins to Father Homer.
Key is to keep the seal of the confession. You know what I mean? You don't want people to overhear each other, so we got to keep cars a certain distance. So traffic management has probably been the biggest logistical issue.
Despite the drive-thru's all-American pedigree, Father Homer came up with the idea last week after seeing South Korea organize drive-thru tests for the coronavirus.
In Hong Kong, subway operator has deployed a fleet of robots to help disinfect its trains and stations in the face of new coronavirus pandemic. These robots are capable of autonomously rolling down the trains as they spray a vaporized hydrogen peroxide solution. More about these high-tech helpers in this report.
This robot technology is normally used in the hospital and the laboratory to do deep disinfection. But after a staff member at the Mass Transit Railway got ill, their office in Mong Kok East started using a robot. They can either be controlled remotely or given a preset route to follow through areas that may have been contaminated with the virus. MTR Operations Director Tony Lee says robots fill the gap where human cleaners cannot reach to execute the risky task.
The first thing we do is use 1 to 49-bit solutions to clean the environment. But there is still a tiny gap or tiny area that is not easy to reach. Therefore, we keep on deep cleaning day in and day out.
Each robot costs $128,000 each and takes about 4 hours to clean an entire 8-car train. Although the city's transportation companies are doing extra disinfection for the buses and subway, people are still worried.
I think to control the coronavirus outbreak, if the government or public organizations don't implement any strong crowd control measure, only by deploying a machine would not help much to contain the virus.
Hong Kong has had good success at keeping the pandemic in check. With 256 infections and 4 deaths, the city has toughened curbs on travelers, ordering 14 days of quarantine for arrivals.
A silver lining, as the United Nations has declared Pakistan second on the rank among happiest countries in South Asia. The UN's World Happiness Report 2020 declared Finland as the world's happiest nation for the third consecutive year. The report said Pakistan is at 29th global position, India at 144, Sri Lanka at 130, and Bangladesh is at 107. Pakistan has made significant improvement as the country was at 67th position in last year's ranking. Meanwhile, India has slipped 4 ranks from 140 last year, near the bottom of the list of the 153 countries ranked. The report collects data on per capita GDP growth, social support, freedom to make life choices, and perceptions of corruption. People around the world are celebrating Nowruz, which marks the first day of spring and the beginning of Persian New Year. But the new coronavirus pandemic has overshadowed the celebrations as public gatherings are prohibited. More than 300 million people around the world celebrate Nowruz, which has been a tradition for over 3,000 years. Iraq Kurds normally celebrate Nowruz Spring Festival by lighting fires on the top of mountains and gathering in public squares. But this year, they have been forced to light fires on the roof of their houses due to the new coronavirus fears. Nowruz is one of the biggest annual festivals celebrated in Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and other countries on 21st March. Grammy-winning country singer Kenny Rogers has passed away at the age of 81. His family said Rogers died from natural causes. A statement on his website said the legendary singer was surrounded by his family at the time of his death. Rogers embarked on a world farewell tour in 2016, but was forced to cancel show in April 2018 due to health concerns. After beginning his career in the 1950s with a jazz group, Rogers went solo in the 1970s and released his breakthrough single Lucille in 1977. The International Monetary Fund says the impact of the coronavirus pandemic will be severe, but the economic shock will be temporary. IMF Strategy Policy and Review Head Martin Mellsen said the global economy is more resilient than it was before 2008 crisis. Mellsen said the long expansionary period and high employment rates mean the global economy should weather the storm. He said the main goal for governments should be to limit the spread of the virus in a way that provides confidence. The official said the authorities have already taken unprecedented measures to provide liquidity to markets to keep them functioning. He said the IMF is working for minimal interest rate loans to help emerging markets deal with sharp capital outflows. In the US, 2 Republican senators have been accused of selling shares before the prices dropped due to coronavirus fears. Both the senators are facing calls to resign. Senator Richard Burr bumped up to $1.7 million of stocks last month, while Kelly Loeffler sold holdings of worth $3 million in a series of transactions on the day Senate held a briefing on the virus. Both senators have denied doing any impropriety. In a tweet, Loeffler said the allegation is a ridiculous and baseless attack. President Donald Trump told reporters the senators should possibly be investigated. The U.S. law makes it illegal for the members of Congress to trade on the basis of non-public information gathered during their official duties. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.